Senator Tammy Duckworth, thanks so much for joining us on GZERO World.
It's good to be on. Thanks for having me.
So, we're talking about the 20th anniversary of the Iraq War, something you experienced very personally. It was back on November 12th, 2004, when an RPG pierced the plexiglass floor of a Black Hawk that you were piloting, exploding next to your legs and changing your life. Today, you sit as a senator on the U.S. Armed Services and Foreign Relations Committee. I want to ask you, how do you think about Iraq, your experience, and your life 20 years later?
Obviously, it was a turning point in my life. I wouldn't be on this path to public service here in the United States Senate were it not for me being wounded and ending up in the hospital at Walter Reed and meeting a newly elected senator from Illinois by the name of Barack Obama, who had only been in office. I think he was elected November 6th, and I was injured November 12th. And meeting him, and he was on the Veterans Affairs Committee, and developing a relationship with him and Senator Durbin, which led to me eventually running for office. But at this point, 20 years from when the war started, I feel that Iraq is somewhat unfinished business for what I hope for the country, which is to one day be a friend and ally to the United States in the way that we have developed relationships with countries like Japan and Korea and Germany, where we're very good in the United States of turning former adversaries into allies and long-term friends. And I think we're on still a very long path for that with Iraq. But I hope for them to develop and grow their democracy. So I don't think the work is quite done yet, but the work of the military is certainly done there.
Do you see the Iraqi people today as significantly better off than they were when you were fighting on the ground?
I do see that they're significantly better off than they were when we were fighting on the ground, but also significantly better off than they were under Saddam Hussein. I do think that there's still a much needed room for improvement and investments. The young people of Iraq have a huge unemployment rate, and this is a country that is very young. You also see malign influence from Iran-backed factions within Iraq, including within the Iraqi government itself, that we need to be very careful of. And you still have issues up north in the Kurdistan region, where you see the Kurds who are attempting to really run their autonomous area in a very responsible way, but still, being under the negative influence, negative oversight from the government in Baghdad, cutting off their oil revenues and the like, for example.
You've talked a little bit about the fact that you believe that America's military role, at least on the ground, in regime change in Iraq is over. So too in Afghanistan. You've said the U.S. should have a greater economic role than it presently does in the region. I'm wondering what you think about its diplomatic role, in particular the idea that the United States promotes and exports democracy. What do you think about American promotion of democracy, both in the region and more broadly?
Well, I think when there's true democracy in a region, you also have economic prosperity does follow with that. And so I think that promoting democracy is also good for peace and prosperity in the region. I don't apologize for wanting to spread democracy around the world, because it is the one that most benefits everyday hardworking people and doesn't allow just the elites to prosper, as an authoritarian regime would. But I do think that it requires a lot of hard work. It means that you have to consistently have free and democratic elections. And it does mean that you have to listen to all parties and all of those things. And we don't always do that well here in the United States ourselves. But certainly we need to continue to strive for that, robust democracy. But it is hard work every single day, every single election.
When President Biden says that the world today is a battle of democracies versus autocracies, is that a worldview that you find yourself identifying with?
I don't know that it's a battle, but I certainly do think that those are the two opposing ideas and ideologies. And certainly I know that the PRC and their leader has, the idea that autocracy, authoritarian regimes are the ones that are going to be the most effective. Well, let's see about that. I do think that democracy is still the best form of government, and that with it we can bring real economic prosperity to a nation, to a region. So, I'm always still going to be making sure that we stand up for democracy and democratic norms around the world.
I ask you that, Senator, in part because when you look at the Middle East, there aren't a lot of democracies. The Arab Spring, of course, did not end up the way that a lot had perhaps hoped, including young people on the streets in Egypt, even in Tunisia. Israel is a democracy, but even that increasingly is having some challenges on the ground, and we've seen that with the massive demonstrations in Tel Aviv over the past weeks. If it's democracy versus autocracy in a region like the Middle East, does that just mean that the United States is going to play less of a role?
I don't think so. I think we continue to bring pressure to bear. I think we have to field a team and be on and be there and talk about the fact that, hey, you know what, this is where these are the things that we expect. I think we are also an economic powerhouse, and that people do want to do business with us, and they know that when they do business with America, we don't come in with a debt trap the way the PRC government run programs do, and that where we can be true partners. But that means that they have to be more democratic. And I think we just need to continue to stay the course and push for the role of democracy in all of these countries with whom we want to engage.
What are the lessons you think that Americans, perhaps especially young Americans, should learn, should think about after we pass this date?
That democracy takes a lot of investments. And I sort of have a similar conversation, but not aimed at young Americans. I was in Indonesia recently, talking with some folks there, and I said, listen, remember that over 100 years after our nation's founding, we had a civil war where we killed tens of thousands of Americans, and that was almost 100 years after we had become a country. So let's be very clear about how hard the work of democracy is. I'm not saying that these other countries don't have civil wars, but just that even American democracy has faced some significant challenges well into our 9th decade of being a democracy, and that all that should teach us is that we have to put in the work every single day.
Is the state of democracy today, if you were up there giving the State of the Union, Senator, state of democracy strong in the United States right now?
Yes, I do think it's strong, because you see all of these activist groups and all these folks, whether or not you agree with them, speaking out, stepping up. I was just on a call with a group that supports access to reproductive rights and reproductive health care, not necessarily just abortion, but just all reproductive health care. You see all of these young groups and young people very eager and actively participating, and I think that shows the strength of our democracy.
Before we close, I do want to ask you about veterans, a cause, of course, that's very personal for you. There is an obligation, no question, to all the people that have been fighting and serving their country, many of whom didn't come home, and many of whom that did come home have suffered greatly. What does the United States have to get right when it comes to veterans services for our young men and women?
I think first, American people have to understand that this is a cost of war. That the cost of going to war isn't just the tanks, the guns, the helicopters, and the ammunition during the period of actual conflict. That the cost of war goes on for many decades after the formal ending of those conflicts. And that cost of that war is the obligation we have to our veterans. And that's the deal we made with veterans, right, up front. And so we have to honor that, and we have to honor their service and their sacrifices. This is not a negotiable that, okay, maybe we will live up to our promises to our veterans. No, it's non-negotiable. We have to live up to our veterans, because we would never get folks who would step forward and volunteer and serve in the way that they have if we continue to break our promises to them. How can someone go, kick down doors looking for the bad guys if they wonder whether or not they're going to be cared for when they get home, and whether their families are going to be supported if they were killed in action? And so we have to make sure that our troops can focus 100% on the task at hand, which is to hunt down and bring the fight to our enemies when we ask them to. And they can't do that if they're worried about what happens after their time in service. So it's really vitally important for us, not just because it's an honorable thing to do, but it's also militarily the right thing to do for our military readiness.
Senator Tammy Duckworth, thank you for your service.
Thank you.